Welcome to Environmental Fridays. It is Personal, Season 3. This season we'll be featuring 12 episodes with 12 guest speakers from Barbados, Delaware, Grenada, Illinois, Kansas, Michigan, St. Lucia, Trinidad, Washington, and Virginia. Now here's our host, Dr. Desmond Hartwell Murray. And this week's co-host, Laurel Berman. And this week's guest, Debra Shore.
All right, so welcome again to Environmental Fridays. This is Season 3 of Environmental Fridays. Environmental Fridays, it is personal. That's our branding. So here is our website. It's www.theenvironmentalfridays.com. So you can go there to get more information. And if you wish right now, I'll leave this up for a couple of seconds. You could take your camera and you see that a QR code. That QR code with your camera would take you to our website.
You are the best ever.
So we are still hearing talking in the background. So yes, did everyone get a chance? Or who wants to anyway? So that will take you to our website. You will see a lot more information there on our website. So for Season 3, just a quick overview of Season 3. We have 12 episodes up till December the 9th, I believe. 12 speakers. And as you could see here, they come from across the United States and the Caribbean, Barbados, Delaware, Grenada. So if you don't know some of these places, by tuning in, you will get to know some of these wonderful places. They have beautiful, like Barbados and Grenada have some of the best beaches in the world. Delaware, Grenada, Illinois, Kansas, Michigan, St. Lucia, Trinidad, from where I'm from, Washington, and Virginia. So if you want to find out who the speakers are and what their topics are, you can again go to our website under the schedule tab, and all of them are listed there, their topic, and a little short bio about themselves. So this is what Season 3 is offering us this time around. So there are many reasons why we started Environmental Fridays and why we continue to have Environmental Fridays. One of the ones that I particularly like actually came from the Benton spirit. In the last issue, well, the issue before this one, we have one out today. It says, if your house is on fire in the middle of the night and you know it, do you keep it to yourself? Do you only tell the adults? Do you not tell the children? Do you not tell the Black kids or the Navajo kids or the Caribbean kids? Do you wake them up? This is what Environmental Fridays is all about, telling the truth. As the late Jamaican singer Bob Marley sang, tell the children the truth. Our environmental truths, our climate crisis truths, our environmental justice truths, and then bring these to actionable awareness, because we don't want this series to just be talk, 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 and no action. And so we want follow-up and inspiration to go out and do something good and take care of our environment. So my friend Laurel Berman is, let me just change here to, is my co-host for today. And she has been with me from the start, from the inception of Environmental Fridays. She's helped in multiple ways, even up to this morning, called me at like 7 or something, texted me. Are you guys seeing seeing the screen?
Yes.
Okay, good, good. I don't want to be talking, yeah. So
You're in presenter view.
okay, all right. And so she's been a friend and been supportive from the very start. She leads she's the national coordinator for the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry National Land Use Reuse Health Program. It's a mouthful. A division of the Center of CDC, the Center for Disease Control, which integrates public health and redevelopment from the early planning stages. She brings her skills from a long career as an environmental scientist and also from engaging with the community. She holds a PhD and a master's in environmental and occupational health from University of Illinois, Chicago, School of Public Health, with a focus on industrial hygiene and toxicology. And she works a lot. She's an adjunct faculty in public health at UIC, DePaul, and at Andrews University. So Laurel, I will stop sharing and allow you to share. Yep, you should be able to share.
Okay. Thank you so much, Desmond.
You're welcome.
And a shout out to many of my colleagues from UIC and EPA who are on the call. Yes, I'm still doing land reuse work. So today's speaker is the administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Region 5. That's the Chicago office serving the Midwestern states. Debra Shore is the regional administrator, US EPA Region 5. Her responsibilities include overseeing environmental protection efforts in the Great Lakes states of Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin, as well as 35 federally recognized tribal nations. One of her roles is manager of EPA's Great Lakes National Program. It's a national program office where we have worked collaboratively for many years. They do so much wonderful work, and in which she leads restoration and protection of the largest freshwater system in the world. Prior to coming to EPA, Shore was elected member of the Board of Commissioners of the Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. We used to call it the Sanitary District, and I did a brief stint there when I finished college. The Metropolitan Water Reclamation District is a $1 billion agency responsible for wastewater treatment and stormwater management for more than 5 million people. She's a strong advocate for cleaning up the Chicago waterways and for resource recovery, including the reuse of treated water and the generation of renewable energy. And I thought we'd have one little surprise. You may not remember this. This is a day in the life of Shore along the shore. And we can get the photographer who took this picture, Lloyd DeGray.
Hi, Deborah. How are you?
Lloyd, what a surprise.
It was 17 years ago.
I told him not to say.
And I think your back got a little wet when I took that picture, but it was a northeast wind in Lake Michigan and I couldn't resist. So, but I just wanted to say hi and take care.
So Desmond has an incredible ability to rope people into doing things at 5 and 6 in the morning. Neither one of us really sleep a lot, so we have a lot of chit chat. So just wanted to wrap up with saying a typical day yesterday. I know that you were at Wisconsin Center. We just had a tribal conference there in August. Many of my EPA colleagues were there. Yesterday, you were meeting with Great Lakes mayors on water equity and lead service lines to discuss the distribution of water infrastructure dollars. And this is a terribly important topic in many of our communities in the Midwest, where we have aging water pipes lined with lead. So very important work. With that, I will turn it back over to Desmond. I will be listening in for a while, and then I have a to leave for an appointment, but I'm very honored to be here. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you, thank you. All right, so Alfred, you have yep, you can go ahead and put your slides up.
I'll ask Alfred to wait for a little bit if you don't mind,
Okay.
Professor Murray.
Very good, very good.
So if you want, I'll just plunge in. That might be an appropriate verb given
right
the
in.
slide that Dr. Berman just showed. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you, Professor Murray and Dr. Berman. Thank you. And good morning to everyone joining us. It's great to see many of you, and to the folks from Region 5 who are joining. The image that Dr. Berman showed was when I first ran for office, and a Chicago publication called The Reader was doing a cover story on me, and engaged Lloyd DeGrain to take some photos. And that was indeed 17 years ago, was in the early fall of 2006 or so, or 2005 actually, when I was first running in the primary the following spring. One of the things that I learned is being a candidate, and I think being any kind of effective leader involves telling stories. And so I want to share part of my story with you today, my sort of meandering path that brought me to my current seat, because I think it's illustrative that there are many ways to get to where you may want to go, or not knowing where you want to go, but where your path may lead you. So I'll share a little bit about my story that led me to this role as regional administrator, and then share some images and describe our current work at EPA and in Region 5. And I hope that you will feel free to put questions in the chat, or I'll endeavor to leave some time at the end of our visit today for a discussion or to try to answer your questions. I am not somebody who had a master plan to run for public office or to become EPA's regional administrator. I was a writer and editor. I was born in Chicago, grew up in Dallas, Texas, and moved back to Chicago 40 years ago after some interim stays in the Mid-Atlantic and in New England. And I love Chicago. I think it's the great heartland city, the great American city. I love the Midwest. But I studied philosophy and art in college and was told that I was a good writer. And I secured 2 jobs after graduating from college, writing for 2 different university alumni magazines. And that work really taught me much about writing for magazines, how to put a magazine together, and how to ask questions, which I think any liberal arts education prepares us to do, and not to make assumptions, but be willing to ask lots of questions, which the staff at Region 5 can tell you I still am doing. And so I worked as a writer and editor, and when I moved back to Chicago, I got a job at a civic watchdog group called the Better Government Association, learned how to do investigative journalism, working with different media partners, still was doing a fair amount of writing. And I'd been a hiker and backpacker and camper in my sort of vacation life. But most of that activity was in Colorado and New Mexico, sometimes Montana. But I lived in Chicago and I thought I want to get to know nature near where I live. And so Alfred, if you would put up maybe the first and second slide, I'll show you some pictures because I learned about a group of volunteers. Go to the next one. Who were working in the Cook County Forest Preserves, which are today 70,000 acres of protected natural lands interwoven in the great metropolis of Chicago. You can get there by public transportation. And these forest preserves provide a refuge for globally significant plants and animals, for biological diversity that's rare on the planet. These forest preserves have some of the remaining prairies and oak woods and wetlands that were once part of the native landscape throughout not only northeastern Illinois, but also part of Indiana, southern Wisconsin, and even southwestern Michigan. And I learned about volunteers who would go out on weekend mornings, next slide, to restore these woods and prairies and wetlands. Because what we learned over the last 50 years or so is that it's not sufficient to protect land by calling it a park or preserve and preventing development. These areas were becoming degraded because they were fragmented, because we had changed the way water flows across the landscape, because we had stopped the wildfires that used to occur, either caused by lightning or set by Native Americans, that were part of the natural regime under which these woods and prairies, savannas and wetlands evolved. And a group of volunteers starting in the late 1970s in the Chicago region learned to do stewardship of these natural areas, cutting invasive brush like buckthorn and removing it, opening up areas to light that had become shaded and where the spring wildflowers were no longer appearing and where oaks were not reproducing because they couldn't get enough light. So by learning to do this habitat work, volunteers were restoring health to these natural areas. And I joined them, and I found that I liked the work and I liked the people, and that, as a writer and philosopher, Bill Jordan, has said, restoration is a reciprocal act, that in working to restore nature, it restores us, our bodies, and our spirits. And I felt that that work of restoration puts us in what some would call right relationship with the land, because we're no longer just users or abusers of natural resources. We become caring kin. We can make amends for much of the degradation that we've caused, sometimes unwittingly, sometimes on purpose. And so I found this work to be restorative for me, to be vital in working to have healthy nature. And through this volunteer work, I met many of the leaders in conservation in this region who had been talking for a number of years about creating a larger network or consortium of public and private organizations to work together to protect and preserve and restore the biological diversity still existing in the greater crescent of protected lands around the southern tip of this great lake, Lake Michigan. And by the mid-1990s, these conservation organizations who had been discussing how to do this launched an initiative called Chicago Wilderness. Imagine that, Chicago, this great metropolitan area, the largest city in the nation, whose name links it to the native landscape. Chicago is the Potawatomi word for a plant called the nodding wild onion that grew in profusion along the riverbanks and that grows here still. And that's something that many of us in our disconnected modern world don't realize, that our place names often connect us to the native landscape. Anyway, they launched the Chicago Wilderness Consortium. I wrote about it for a couple of magazines, and as they were discussing what kind of publication they might have to tell the rest of the world and to tell each other about the studies that were being done, the research and the people doing all this work, I fell into the editor's chair and helped to launch a new magazine called Chicago Wilderness that became a quarterly publication beginning in late 1997. And I did that work for almost a decade. But at the same time, this work of restoration is sometimes counterintuitive, that we need to cut some trees in order to have healthy woodlands and healthy forests. And we need to burn places in order to have healthy woodlands and prairies. That's not something that we automatically knew or understood, and yet we discovered that that's the case. And that came under a lot of criticism. And so that led a number of us to be more active politically, to advocate for more care of these precious natural areas, to get more involved in the political realm, because that's where budgets are decided, where policies are made, and where if you don't advocate for what you care about, then the people in power may not pay attention. And that's a lesson that I'm sure resonates in many other realms for all of you. So I became more involved politically, began to volunteer to help more reform-minded people get elected to the Cook County Board, because it has oversight over the forest preserves, and helped to launch a group called Friends of the Forest Preserves, and continued writing for this magazine. And in the early 2000s, someone approached me and said, would you consider running for a seat on the board of the Water Reclamation District? And I knew what the agency did. It's the very large wastewater and stormwater utility, serving not only Chicago, but the rest of Cook County, Illinois, 129 other municipalities. And my work this far in restoration and learning about conservation, not through academic study, but just my hands-on volunteer work, I believe that water is going to be the issue in years to come. In fact, in many places it already is. We are now living in a world with water scarcity, serious water quality issues, flooding because of climate change and more intense rain events, and severe droughts. I could go on. And given my experience with restoration and my knowledge about water issues, I decided to give it a shot, to run for a seat on the board of the Water Reclamation District, because I thought I might have something to bring to it. As I said at the outset, I did not have a master plan to run for office. This wasn't a dream of mine for a long time, but you will find in talking to a number of candidates that sometimes they are prompted to run, they're inspired to run, they're moved to run because they feel that those in power either aren't listening to them or just not caring as much about the issues they care about. And so sometimes it's driven by anger or by dismay or by a belief that you have an important viewpoint to bring. So I gathered people around me to form a sort of kitchen cabinet. We've studied the race. It's very hard to run at large in the second largest county in the country. You either need to have a really good ballot position, which is the luck of the draw, or be endorsed by the Cook County Democratic Party. I sought their endorsement, but was not endorsed the first time I ran. But I got lucky and drew the second ballot position and was the first woman on the ballot. And my name, Debra Shore, was beneficial in running for a water office. In fact, the logo on that T-shirt that Dr. Berman showed sort of tied shore to water. I was able to raise a fair amount of money. I secured the newspaper endorsements. The Sierra Club was endorsed by many ward and township organizations and other groups, and ran hard and was successful. I came in first in a field of 9 in the primary in March of 2006. And in Cook County, because it's so heavily Democratic, winning the primary is close to, is really tantamount to winning the election. I mentioned telling stories. One of the stories that I told in my campaign, and that I tell still, had to do with my driveway. And Alfred, if you would go to the next slide. This is an image, it's an older image because we've since planted a bunch of oak trees and ground cover on our front yard so that we have a mini oak savanna now. But this is where I live, a modest single family home in Skokie, Illinois, with a rather large asphalt driveway. And my partner and I wanted to rip up the asphalt driveway, which is an impervious surface, and replace it with something that's permeable, that would allow rainwater to infiltrate and recharge our underground aquifer, instead of running off into the street where it collects salt and oil and contaminants, and then goes into a storm sewer, mixes with sewage, gets sent to a wastewater treatment plant where the liquid waste is separated from the solid waste. But in Cook County, we don't return that rainwater to the lake. It gets sent downstream through an artificial highway called the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal, and ends up flushing into the Gulf of Mexico. Not an especially sustainable way of treating our precious freshwater. So we wanted to rip up our driveway and replace it with a permeable surface. And there's a formula called the runoff coefficient that you can use to calculate how much rainwater runs off of an impervious surface, like a driveway or a rooftop or a building. So we calculated the runoff from our driveway. Next slide. And it's 9,000 to 10,000 gallons a year. And what that image shows you is 3 years worth of rain on our driveway alone, which is essentially fresh water delivered free of charge right to our doorstep that we were sending into the sewers because of that impervious surface. And that's what, just a small thing that someone can do to capture rain where it falls and keep it out of the sewers and allow it to recharge our underground aquifers. And so I told this driveway story because that's the kind of initiatives for green infrastructure that I wanted to advocate for and propose and support working on the board of the Water Reclamation District. As I said, I won that election and I won 2 more. It was a 6-year term and I was serving there for almost 15 years. Alfred, if you would stop the slide deck for just a minute. There's another thing I want to do. One of the points that I made, and that I think all of you working in water issues and conservation, is that unlike fossil fuels, there are no substitutes for fresh water. There are substitutes for oil and gas, and we're moving fast to deploy solar and wind and hydropower and so on. But fresh water, the substance on which almost all life depends, while it's in a renewable cycle, it's also a finite resource. So I want to share with you 2 paragraphs from an article that appeared in the New Yorker magazine several years ago called The Last Drop by an author named Michael Spector. And in it, he wrote, philosophers and economists, at least since Copernicus, have noted that although no substance is more valuable than water, none is more likely to be free. In The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith called this the diamond water paradox. Although water is essential for life, and the value of diamonds is mostly aesthetic, the price of water has always been far lower than that of diamonds. Economists often argue that water should be considered a commodity, like housing or food. But water possesses an intangible, even mystical quality that transcends the principles of economics. People simply don't think about it in the way that they think about transportation or clothing, and they never have. Water is precious, but not like oil, which once burned is gone forever. While there is almost no human activity that doesn't depend on water in some way, it never actually disappears. When water leaves one place, it simply goes somewhere else. Water that dinosaurs drank is still consumed by humans. Think about that. And the amount of fresh water on Earth has not changed significantly for millions of years. But that doesn't mean it's available when or where it's needed. Nearly all of the Earth's water is in the ocean. Only 3% is even theoretically available for humans to drink. Much of that is locked in polar ice caps and glaciers, or deeply embedded in layers of rock. Let me use some props. If a large bucket were to represent all the seawater on the planet, and a coffee cup the amount of fresh water frozen in glaciers, only a teaspoon would remain for us to drink. And of that teaspoon, nearly 20% is in the Great Lakes. So that's the end of quoting from Michael Spector, but think about it. Nearly 20% of all the fresh surface water on the planet is in the Great Lakes. So that means a couple of things. One, those of us who have access to Great Lakes water are enormously fortunate. But it also means we have, I think, a moral and signal obligation to be caring stewards of this precious resource, to show that we aren't wasting it. And so in the talks I give, I would use these props, and people would say, you had me when you raised the bucket. And my best friend used to live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where water is more scarce and more costly. And she kept a bucket just like this in her shower stall. And every morning when she turned on the water and waited for it to warm up, she captured that water in her bucket and then used it to water her plants, water her garden. You can use it to flush the toilet if you live in an apartment. It's perfectly good drinking water, just going down the drain in that minute it takes for your shower to warm up. So I now do that. Keep a bucket in my shower stall and capture that water and water my plants. It saves maybe a nickel, a dime over a month or more, but because in Chicago, water is still pretty cheap. But it's something we can do to demonstrate that we're trying to be stewards of that precious water. There's much more you can do, and I can share some thoughts with you. Another is to liberate your lawn. If you drove by our home today, you would see no front lawn, but ground cover of ivy and vinca and oak trees. So we no longer mow and we no longer irrigate. The American lawn is the largest irrigated crop in the nation. And what does it produce? Well, nothing edible. So liberate part of your lawn, plant native plants that provide habitat for birds and bees and beneficial insects, and that allow water to infiltrate through their root systems. Alfred, if you would put up the next slide, I'm going to tell one more story, one more prop from my time at the old sanitary district, and then we'll go to the my current role at EPA. So one of the issues we deal with in water quality in rivers and streams has to do with nutrient loading, the runoff from our fertilized lawns and farm fields and the wastewater that is discharged into waterways because it contains phosphorus and nitrogen. And those nutrients are essential for plants to grow. So it's absolutely vital for agriculture to have phosphorus. But when those nutrients end up in our waterways, they cause plants to grow, like algae, which sucks up all the oxygen, leaving none for fish. That's why there's a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And increasingly, these harmful algal blooms, like on the west end of Lake Erie and in some of our local streams and ponds. What you see on the screen is a quote from a science writer and philosopher, Isaac Asimov, that he wrote in 1975. He said, life can multiply until all the phosphorus has gone. And then there is an inexorable halt, which nothing can prevent. Now think about that. And the reason he said that is that phosphorus has no substitutes. It's the 11th most common element on the planet, and yet there's no artificial phosphorus. And so when it becomes diluted in waterways and discharged into the Gulf of Mexico, we can't recover that phosphorus in a usable form. But there's a new process that researchers developed that can be installed at wastewater treatment plants to capture the phosphorus out of the waste stream. What I'm holding up now is a vial of phosphorus crystals, these tiny white crystals that were produced at a wastewater plant. These are sold to a commercial fertilizer blender mixed with magnesium and nitrates, but they're not water soluble. So they're injected in the soil, plants take up the nutrients as they grow, and it doesn't run off into waterways. And that's the kind of innovation that we're seeing, driven by regulation and by scarcity. Next slide, Alfred. So just over 10 months ago, I was plucked from my seat at the Water Reclamation District and appointed to become regional administrator, Region 5, by President Biden. It's a political process. I was able to secure support from many members of Congress and unions and the Farm Bureau and others for this appointment. Region 5 is the largest of the 10 EPA regions. It includes 6 of the 8 Great Lakes states and 35 tribal nations. We have more than 1,000 employees, scientists, engineers, lawyers, project managers, and I'll get to that a bit later. Next slide. And one of the focuses, a key priority for the Biden-Harris administration, for EPA Administrator Michael Regan, is environmental justice. How do we advance equity and justice in our work while protecting human health and the environment? And as Administrator Regan has said, every person in the United States has a right to clean air, clean water, and a healthier life, no matter how much money they have in their pockets, the color of their skin, or the zip code where they live. Next slide. So we're working throughout Region 5 on trying to advance equity and justice, making sure I've been traveling through the states, as has Administrator Regan, listening to people in communities to tell us what they're experiencing and what they think the solutions ought to be. Next slide. One of the places that we're working is the area called Cahokia Heights in Illinois. It's near the Mississippi, it's near East St. Louis. It's in an area that's low-lying, that has historically been called the American Bottoms. It's where the Mississippi and its tributaries would overflow when water is high. And it's still overflowing, and they are experiencing serious flooding with sewage overflowing into streets, drinking water issues, and we are trying to assist through funding and frankly through some enforcement actions to bring that system into compliance in a way that will serve the residents there. But we are seeing, as part of climate change, more intense, more localized, and less predictable rainstorms. And that's making it harder, even as areas upstream are becoming more developed. And so they're displacing more stormwater into downstream and low-lying areas. So we have serious issues to try to work together to solve. Next slide. In Southeast Chicago, some of you may have heard about General Iron. It's was a metal shredding company that moved its location from a largely white, more affluent part of Chicago to a more Black and brown community of lower income residents. That really was a pretty stark example of environmental injustice. EPA Region 5 advised the city of Chicago, which was conducting a cumulative health impact assessment, which Region 5 encouraged the city to do. And in the end, the city denied an operating permit to the company because they said, we can't add more pollution to a neighborhood, to a community is already overburdened with other polluting industries. Next slide. The Biden-Harris administration has initiated a program called Justice 40, in which 40% of the federal investments through the infrastructure law and other measures should flow, 40% of the benefits should flow to disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution. Next slide. The infrastructure law was passed last fall, and it is a game changer in the resources that are being devoted to water and wastewater funding, to Superfund, to electric school buses, to $1 billion more to the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative that will accelerate work on cleanup of historically contaminated sites. Next slide. This is one of the electric school buses. $5 billion will go to replacing polluting diesel engines, which are a problem for people with respiratory issues, with clean electric school buses over the next 5 years. Next slide. This just illustrates some of the serious effects of climate change that we're seeing: wildfires, storms, air pollution, and heat waves, and flooding, as you know. Next slide. This shows the decrease in ice cover over the Great Lakes in recent years, because we're having, by and large, warmer winters. When there isn't ice cover that inhibits evaporation from the Great Lakes, there's more water vapor going into the atmosphere. And that's what's coming down in these more intense rainstorms that are causing flooding. Next slide. The Lake Guardian is a boat owned by EPA. It's our research vessel on the Great Lakes. It winters in Milwaukee, but cruises through all of the Great Lakes, monitoring fish populations and algae blooms and all sorts of research that's vital to our understanding how climate change is changing our freshwater ecosystems, where invasive species are, and what we can do about them. Next slide. Some of the work that's supported by EPA through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is through our tribal nations. This is an image showing a study of the moose population conducted by the Grand Portage Band in northern Minnesota. And unfortunately, the warmer winters there mean that ticks that used to die out over the winter are surviving year round. And they are causing such problems for moose that some of the moose are starving because they are so consumed with 100,000 ticks on individual moose. They're also suffering from brainworm disease and from changes in habitat because of the warmer winters. It's vital research that we're helping to support and are trying to understand. Next slide. So, with the infrastructure law and the more recent Inflation Reduction Act, I can tell you EPA is hiring. We're staffing up, not only Region 5, but across the country. We're hiring inspectors and remedial project managers and lawyers and chemists, all kinds of folks. So if you're interested, please go to usajobs.com. There are new positions being posted every week. And I can't think of a more worthy way to spend our time and effort right now than to work to protect public health and the environment. Next slide. Plus, many of these jobs are not only important, but fun. You get to use neat tools like a camera that can capture invisible fumes from methane, or going out on canoes to connect water samples and study the wild rice beds and more than that, or to respond to oil spills or hazardous waste spills and protect human health. Next. So this is, and Professor Murray will have this at your disposal, but this is how to get some information about the people working at Region 5 and the positions that we have open. Next. So, thank you. This is how to reach me. Feel free to contact me at any point. And I think we have a few minutes left for questions. Happy to try to answer any, and thank you for allowing me to share my stories and share some props.
Okay, thank you very much, Administrator Shore. I will start off by saying that this was really very inspirational, informational, and you even had jobs to give us too. So yes, that was really good. One of the things that struck me, especially in the beginning portion of your talk, was, at least my sense, is that your work in the environment is not just, a job. It's something that is deep within you. It's something that's passionate. And it seems like there is a value system, or even like some sort of spiritual basis for your work. Is that a good takeaway? Is that a good sense of where this is coming from?
Well, thank you, Professor Murray, for observing that. And yes, I would say yes, but I think this kind of work speaks to us no matter what our faith tradition, or even if we don't have one. I happen to be Jewish, and in the Jewish faith, we have an imperative called tikkun olam. It means to restore the world, to restore the earth. And there are many ways to do that.
Right.
But I have found this work of habitat restoration and this devotion to public service, both to be ways of fulfilling that imperative. But I would say there are many ways to do it.
Right.
Professor Catherine Hayhoe, who is a climate scientist, and some of you may know her work, talking about communicating about climate change, she feels strongly that we need to do this work out of love. And that love then can inspire hope and lead us to action.
Yes, yes. Other questions? You could unmute whoever has a question.
I have a question for Dr. Shore. This is Walter Murray in Atlanta. And I really piggybacking on your last comment that we need to do this work out of love. And so I work a lot with business owners in the leadership space. And profit seems to be more of a motivation than love. And sometimes the profit motive supersedes the love motivation. What's the challenges that you found working with business owners as you try to promote this love for the environment, environmental focus? Has there been a disconnect there? Is there a challenge there? What have you found?
That's a challenging question and a challenge. I would say there's sort of two levels on which to approach it. And Professor Hayhoe says, try to find what people care about and what you might have in common. Now, it may be that you learn that they care about their family. It may be that they love skiing or scuba diving as a sport. And then you can start talking about climate change in terms of what they're seeing in reduced snowpack or changes in coral reefs or children, their children's activities. Find some way to have common ground. I think the other level is that we really can't have a healthy economy without a healthy ecology.
Yeah.
And that so much of the last 50 years, and the reason EPA was founded was because so much of our industrial growth depended on externalizing to our environment the costs of doing business. In other words, the individual industry was able to pollute and thereby profit because they weren't charged for that polluting. And now we enacted laws like Superfund that seek to have the polluter pay for the costs of what they are discharging into the environment. So, I do think there is a movement afoot in the faith communities to promote stewardship, to promote and recognize that we have a moral obligation to take care of our earth, what Pope Francis calls our common home. And so I would try to find those ways to have tell me about your faith. Tell me what your faith says about our obligation to care for our planet. And happy to continue
Thank you.
Conversation offline. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I love the way you summarize that strong ecology drives a strong economy. That's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, other questions? We could take probably a couple more questions.
Hello, Dr. Murray, it's Princella Tobias.
Yes.
And I was clapping with you at the end of her speech and telling her story. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And you were so right with Environmental Fridays. It is so personal. Administrator Shaw, it is so personal for me. You probably know my story, or our story, should I say. I live in the city of Benton Harbor, Michigan. This is the place for many of you who are on here, where for the last almost year, we cannot drink our water. We cannot brush our teeth with our water, nor can we use water to rinse off our food. This is how personal the environment has been for us. And I want to say to all of you listeners, Administrator Shore, you have not been a stranger to our little small city in Michigan. I think you've been here 2 times, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Yes, you have been here. I've been there one, I think both of the times. I know for sure one, I can remember it like it was yesterday. And I want to thank you for your support, for everything that the EPA has been doing to help our community. There's so much involved with the lead pipes underneath the homes. We are almost 90% have replaced the lead pipes in the city of Benton Harbor, but the EPA has been there with us hand in hand. And so I want to thank you for that. You have been such a champion for us. And one of the questions I have as you were telling your stories is, what can we do even moving forward? I was hoping that you actually had environmental educational funds to help us, because there has been a process to what we have achieved in the last year here in the city of Benton Harbor. And, you know, there's something called the power of education, because if you don't know, you don't know. And so we share a lot of common grounds here. I actually started a newspaper 20 years ago in the city of Benton Harbor to inform, enhance, showcase, promote, and educate the residents. Because if you don't know, you don't know, and education is so powerful. And there's so much that you spoke about that I just say bravo. I'm like a cheerleader here, because the environment is so important. And it took a couple years ago for Dr. Murray to start holding the Environmental Fridays that I started getting involved. And I was hoping there's like environmental funding for this program, Environmental Fridays. And so much as we are now going into the school systems, talking about the environment and talking about so much of what you spoke about, it was very, very rewarding to hear this. And I loved how you talked about the stewards of water. You know, that was another great message that you actually have left me with, and I thank you for it. And then you talked about the environmental justice. And in our case, sometimes it's the injustice. Because of you, Administrator Shore, we are also working with the University of Illinois under the leadership of Dr. Susan Buchanan, who's with UIC of Chicago Public Health. We are working with an asthma program. When I started thinking about justice and injustice, it just tells me that asthma, 6%, 61%, but here in our county, for Black people in Berrien County, we are facing 25% of Blacks in our community has asthma. So when I come to you about any educational funding, it's not for sure not for me. How can we help people with our water situation, with what we're going through with asthma and other situations, and be a warrior, a champion like you have, you know, and how I can even use the paper for that to educate people. But I just see so many things about you that I love. I love your stories. I love everything. And I really thank you for helping the city of Benton Harbor with what we're facing today, and how can we have next steps to continue helping the people of Benton Harbor and Southwest Michigan. So I'll end it because I think I went on too long. I'm just excited, so forgive me. But
no, thank you. Something I want to add is that in Region 5, we're hiring at least 5 new positions in environmental justice who'll be working throughout the region with communities. There may be funding through the water and wastewater state revolving funds for outreach and community engagement. So let's talk separately about that, because what we learned in Flint is that it's so essential to have people from the community working with their neighbors and how to use water filters properly, how to install them and maintain them, because then that removes lead from the water and a lot of things like that. So happy to continue the conversation. Thank you, Princella, for your work.
you're welcome.
Just one more question, but it has to be short. I have a class coming up in like 5 minutes or so. So one more question really quickly.
Commissioner Mary Alice Adams, thank you, Dr. Murray, and thank you for this session. All of them, very educational. My question is, what I've heard and what little I've learned in the past about asphalt, we need to stop using it. Am I correct?
I think it's cement manufacturer that is the more problematic producer of greenhouse gas emissions and heat trapping gases, but yes, asphalt too. I mean, wherever we can reasonably have a permeable surface on driveways or sidewalks or parking lots, it's important to do that. They also need to be maintained, but we need to basically peel back some of the concrete skin that we've laid on our landscape and become more like a sponge.
I think
Thank you. That makes sense.
Yes, thank you for giving us practical suggestions that we could all follow up on. That's one of the things we definitely want to highlight this year, is for each speaker and the audience to take something away that they could actually do. Turn the words into deeds. Okay, so we'll end here today. I had some other things I wanted to do, but next week we will have a talk from the wonderful island of Trinidad. And it's going to be about a nature park situated in the heart of an oil refinery. If that doesn't get your attention and make you ask questions, nothing will. So next week, we want to thank our speaker again. We want to thank my co-host, and we want to thank all of you for joining us for episode 1 of Environmental Fridays. It is personal. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Murray. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you again, Dr. Murray.
Okay, thank you.
Francella.
All right, okay. Have
Thank
a
you
great
very
week.
much.
Again, stay safe,
Weekend.
everybody.
Informative.
Okay, all right. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Okay.
Environmental Fridays was brought to you by these partners and sponsors. For more information, please visit theenvironmentalfridays.com/environmental-fridays-partners. Be sure to visit our website at www.theenvironmentalfridays.com.